Imagine a weapon so feared that it was dubbed the vengeance weapon by the Nazi regime. Capable of delivering a deadly payload with fewer warnings, the V-1 flying bomb was the first cruise missile, and its impact on World War II was so devastating. In this video, we'll explore the history and technology behind this deadly weapon of mass destruction, the Vengeance Weapon 1. On June 13, 1944, just before dawn, the Royal Observer Corps in Kent saw a number of tiny aircraft with brilliant exhaust plumes trailing behind and noisy engines. Not long after, one of them went down in London's East End, setting up a huge explosion in Bethnal Green. About 266 people were left homeless, and 6 people died. The little airplane's remnants were discovered in the massive bomb hole. Newspaper reports claimed that German Luftwaffe raiders were to blame for the damage, although British officials were aware of this. German boasts about using new weapons to attack Britain forced the British Home Secretary to admit that pilotless aircraft, often known as robot planes, were attacking the country. The command of the United States Army Air Forces, UAF, was undoubtedly worried. Could the Nazis have ruined the plans for the D-Day assault or created widespread fear, which would have destroyed the British war economy if they had started launching this new weapon at Britain sooner? Prime Minister Winston Churchill and General Dwight Eisenhower, 2 important Allied commanders, had talked about those exact situations. Since the 1930s, there has been a persistent fear of Germany's cutting-edge technology. After German researchers discovered nuclear fission in Berlin at the end of 1938, it immediately led to the British, Canadian, and American atomic bomb effort. Hitler himself hinted to the possibility of superweapons in 1939, maybe in reference to the Army's top-secret rocket program that would produce this weapon of mass destruction. In the spring of 1943, Churchill issued an order for a special airstrike on the Peenemünde rocket facility located on the Baltic when British intelligence learned about that program. It was intended to murder the rocket engineers and derail the project, but it was only partially successful when it was carried out in August. The Allies diverted strategic bombers in late 1943 and early 1944 in an attempt to disrupt the missile launch and storage sites that were being built in northern France. News alarm over the impending arrival of German reaction-propelled aircraft peaked in the spring of 1944. In May, the Mi-163 rocket interceptor made its combat debut, swiftly slicing through formations of bombers. Swiftly slicing through formations of bombers. The first Mi-262 turbojet aircraft were also deployed towards the end of July. However, there was no emergency. The Mi-163 flew so quickly that it was difficult to engage an American bomber in gunfire, and after 5 minutes it would run out of fuel. The pilot would glide back to base. Because of the increasing Allied air supremacy, U.S. fighter pilots quickly learned to either intercept them during the glide phase or hide around the landing grounds to shoot them down. The V-1 flying bomb, which the Germans called Vengeance Weapon 1, Vergeltungswaffen 1, made its maiden strike at Bethnal Green. Because of its unique pulse-jet engine sound, the British dubbed it the Doodlebug, or Buzz Bomb. The V-1 was not the technical marvel that was first thought to exist. The ballistic missile known as the V-2 or Vengeance Weapon 2 fit that description better. The V-1 was made primarily of sheet metal, was inexpensive to make, and could be assembled rapidly in contrast to the V-2's technological advancements. It looked like a little stubby airplane with short wings. It was powered by an 80-octane gasoline-powered basic jet engine. The buzz bomb had to be based forward on the French side of the English Channel due to its restricted range of 148 miles. It was then launched toward London from a tilted ramp. Its flying direction was decided by that. The Germans carried out over 8,000 V-1 hits in the next 3 months, almost all of which were directed towards London. These strikes resulted in 5,500 fatalities, 16,000 injuries, and the forced evacuation of almost 1 million people. Using fighter interceptors, barrage balloons, and anti-aircraft weapons, the British had significant success against the V1. When Allied troops in Europe took control of the launch sites in September 1944, the first phase of the V1 attack on Britain came to an end. For a period, E-111 bombers used an air-launched variant of the V1 to strike Britain. Nevertheless, the buzz bomb's primary objective was Belgium, namely the port of Antwerp. Only a few hundred of the upgraded ground-based version that was developed late in the war managed to make it all the way to Britain. Over 30,000 V1s of different kinds were manufactured. Nearly 25,000 were fired against targets in Belgium and England between June 1944 and March 1945. Out of them, 7,000 made it to some place in England, with less than 4,000 of them coming down in the London region. How was it even possible for the Nazis to invent such a deadly weapon? Since the 1930s, the Germans have been developing flying bombs and rockets. The center of the program was located in Peenemünde, a large complex of test facilities and labs situated on a secluded part of the Baltic coast, close to the Polish border. Werner von Braun was the technical director at Peenemünde, and the man behind the V2, due to the interest of Führer Adolf Hitler, who desired new weapons to retaliate against Britain for bombing German towns. Development accelerated in 1942. The weapons of vengeance, with their capacity to instill fear, were ideal for him. The German Army's Ordnance Section worked on the A-4 rocket, which became the V2. Unwilling to leave the bombardment role to the Army, the Luftwaffe developed the FZG-76 pilotless bomb, which eventually evolved into the V1. Flight testing of the V2 began in June 1942. The V1's maiden flight took place in December 1942. It was planned for Operation Eisbar, also known as Polar Bear, to start in December 1943 and use a combination of V1 and V2 aircraft to destroy London. Proposals to employ the revenge weapons on other targets, such the ports in southern Britain, where the armada for the D-Day assault was assembling, were met with resistance from Hitler. His obsession was exacting revenge on London, but he also thought the V-weapons could help change the direction of the war. The Tower Bridge across the River Thames served as the precise aim point, and London was designated as target 42 inches in the German plan. It turned out that the Tower Bridge was never struck by a V1. Were the British even aware of what would hit them soon? Even though the experimental facility at Peenemünde had been known to British intelligence since 1939, they were unaware of its complete mission. An expert Royal Air Force photo translator identified a T-shaped bolt on an aerial shot in May 1943 as an airplane without a cockpit and a curved shadow on the picture as an elevated ramp. For the first time, the V1 had been spotted and identified by the British. In July, reconnaissance came up with a V2 prototype close to its test stand on a transport trailer. While hundreds of RAF bombers bombed Peenemünde in August 1943 as part of Operation Crossbow, the vital research had already been completed. The manufacturing work was relocated by the Germans. Crossbow then moved to the French coast ski sites, so named because the launch ramps resembled ski jumps. Crossbow targets accounted for 14% of Allied heavy bomber sorties and 15% of light bomber missions between August 1943 and August 1944. News outlets carried sporadic reports on German secret weapons. British Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill recognized the presence of rocket or robot plane sites in France in February 1944. The mistaken public belief that the guns were radio-controlled was often reiterated. Around 100 ski sites were successfully destroyed by the bombers, along with roughly 2,400 V-1 missiles that were in the process of being produced and delivered. The ski sites were replaced with simpler, altered ones by the Germans. Apart from the launch facility, there were not many outbuildings or construction. Each modified site could be constructed in 8 days, and they were considerably simpler to conceal and blend in with. The first of them was recognized by the Allies many months later. Crossbows slowed down, but did not stop. The V-1 program. Hitler's plan to launch Operation Eisbar in December 1943 was not successful. It wasn't prepared until June 1944, 1 week after the Normandy Day landings. If the V-1s had been utilized, it would not have made much of an impact on the invasion. They would have been just as likely to hit the German defenses as the Allied forces on the beaches because of their incredible accuracy. There were no ailerons or other control surfaces on the V-1's wings. The missile was aimed at London after being positioned on the incline ramp. A piston catapult helped with the takeoff. The pulse jet engine then took control. The buzz bomb crossed the English Channel in 5 minutes at its 400 mph cruise speed, 10 miles distant. Someone reported the pulsing sound as similar to a Model T Ford going uphill. It was produced by the jet engine firing at 50 cycles, or pulses, every second, opening and shutting the combustion chamber. The bomb's nose propeller's revolutions were counted to determine the bomb's distance. The bomb's nose tilted down into a steep dive as the ignition was cut off after the propeller had spun a certain number of times. Speculatively, the V-1 was over the target when the ignition cutout occurred. Actually, there was a significant detour from the planned flight path. One of the 4 buzz bombs dropped during the initial attack on June 13th landed near London's outskirts. The distances of the others were all more than 22 miles. The buzz bomb's roar abruptly stopped, giving residents of London and the surrounding area around 12 seconds to find shelter before the missile detonated upon collision with the Earth. In terms of absolute power, the V-1 was not very strong. With a 830-pound warhead, it could carry less than twice as many gusts as an airplane. But there was a lot of dread since the attacks were sporadic. Nobody was sure where or when the next big storm would hit. The V-1 assaults on London lasted for 7 weeks after the explosion at Bethnal Green. Churchill stated in July that between 100 and 150 flying bombs, each weighing about a ton, are being discharged daily. According to him, the death toll was almost exactly 1 person per bomb. There was a lot of destruction. The city bus's glass panes eventually vanished. According to historian Rick Atkinson, thousands upon thousands of homes were destroyed. The attack peaked on August 3rd, when 316 missiles were fired, with around 220 of them making it to London. A buzz bomb went just missing Buckingham Palace. It hit a large ash tree on the property and burst before it hit the earth, shattering several windows in the royal mansion. The British, who sent false reports back to the Germans via double agents, was the sole source of information available to them about the location of the buzz bomb strikes. The Germans were duped into retargeting, which increased the likelihood that the bombs would strike areas with fewer people. In a Daily Express review, Nigel Blundell stated, "The subterfuge had to be kept secret, of course, not only to fool the Germans, but also to keep from the population of the southeast suburbs and countryside that their lives were being endangered to make central London safer. The Germans withdrew from their V-1 launch sites in northern France in mid-August in order to evade being captured by the Allied invasion troops. France launched its final buzz bomb on September 7th. There were 8,617 V-1s launched in all between June and September. Nearly half of the over 1,000 aircraft that crashed on takeoff were shot down by British forces. Only 25% of them had any impact on London, with many landing far away. In order to employ the launch sites against targets on the continent, the Germans started moving them to eastern Germany. Within 24 hours of the British government declaring on September 7th that the Battle of London is over except possibly for the last few shots, the first of the V2s dropped on the city. For the following 6 months, they continued to arrive on occasion, but not in the same quantity as the V1s. The Operation Crossbow, strikes against the V1 facilities, were shelved due to their lack of effectiveness. An active defense consisting of 4 layers, a fighter belt at sea, an inland fighter belt, a coastal belt of anti-aircraft weapons, and a belt of barrage balloons closest to London, was effective. The new Hawker Tempest IV was the greatest RAF interceptor, swift and agile at low altitudes, but only came in small quantities. 68 flying bombs were shot down by Tempest aircraft between June and August. Aside from the Spitfire Fafina, the Mustang and the Mosquito were also useful fighters. The buzz bomb's steel covering could be blasted apart by a 20-mm gun shell, but the pilots feared not to approach too closely. Metal was launched in all directions as a V1 detonated in the air. It was discovered by a few pilots that they could tip the V1 over and out of control by sliding a wing beneath it. In this fashion, 3 V1s were destroyed. Fighter interceptors outperformed weapons in favorable weather. Thus, the Germans focused their efforts on days when the weather prevented the aircraft from operating. The introduction of proximity-fuzzed rounds from the United States significantly enhanced the weapon's performance. Approximately 8% of the V1s intercepted were caught by the barrage balloons, which captured some of the ones that managed to pass through. Some V1s had balloon cable cutters installed on the leading edges of their wings as a countermeasure. Churchill stated, "By the end of August, not more than 1 bomb in 7 got through to the London area." The Germans created several additional V1 variations as the war went on. On the 9th of July, a Henkel He-111 bomber came within 60 miles of England and detonated a buzz bomb situated inboard of the engine, beneath the port wing. Approximately 1,600 air-launched V1s were used against Britain between July and January 1945. Almost all of them were directed against London. The precision was considerably lower than guns fired from the ground. Half of those dropped from He-111s in September missed London by a distance of 24 miles. The V1 Danger moved to Belgium in October, particularly to Antwerp, a vital port. The Germans dropped 11 1988 1 bombs on Belgium between that time and March 1945, which was more than they sent against England. Still, accuracy remained lacking. Only 21 buzz bombs were dropped into Antwerp. V2 missiles also targeted Belgium. The deadliest day was December 16th, when a V2 struck an Antwerp movie theater, killing 567 people. In the meantime, the Germans were devoting all of their attention to developing a longer-range V1 that could be launched from Holland and attack Britain. The outcome was the F1 version, which had a smaller warhead and a larger fuel tank. Greater range was attained, but explosive impact was lost in the process. Just 13 of the 275 of these variations that were shot at England in March 1945 made it to London. A piloted variant of the final V1 development was meant to be used for high-value target attacks. It was rumored that the pilot may escape at any time. Before the Luftwaffe decided it was a terrible idea and scrapped the entire project in 1945, many test flights were carried out. 10,500 FIF-1s of various types were launched in direction of England. 2,000 crashed during or soon after takeoff. 52.8% of the shots were made by the defenders. A few made it through although their impact on the war's conclusion was minimal. In Upper Norwood, London, firefighters and civil defense personnel searched for survivors within a hole created by a substantial pile of debris after a V-1 bomb. The V-1 and V-2 weapons were unmistakably the forerunners of contemporary cruise missiles, notwithstanding their general lack of military utility. The combined average error of the V-1 and V-2 weapons was over 9.3 miles, stated Church. The Germans could have dropped 2 or 3 one-ton bombs per square mile each week, even if they had fired 120 weapons a day, and we had shot down none of them. The V-weapons came at a significant opportunity cost to the Germans. Historian Richard Overy stated, the resources that went to build them could have produced an additional 24,000 aircraft, according to the American Bombing Survey. In 1944, the Americans created their own version of the buzz bomb, the JB-2 Thunderbug, using V-1 parts that they transported to Wright Field. However, the development was discontinued as the war came to a conclusion. One of the first people to understand the legacy of the V-weapons was Hanson Baldwin of the New York Times. In August 1944, he stated, "The flying bomb will not win this war. Furthermore, unless its relative, the enormous rocket that the Germans are getting ready to launch on London, has unimaginable capability, the rocket won't either. However, they are both future weapons. Both have had a significant impact on military operations and will continue to do so." It did not take long for ballistic missiles and space rockets to play a significant role. Von Braun, the head of Peenemünde Research, later rose to the position of director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Furthermore, it is easy to identify the V-1 as the precursor of the cruise missile, which is widely used in contemporary military operations. Unlike the V-1, which was substantially smaller, the V-2 rocket was a ballistic missile rather than an autonomous aircraft. It was launched from a Mylar wagon, a kind of mobile transporter erector launcher. The V-2 warhead had the same explosive output as the V-1 warhead, albeit having more sophisticated technology. The damage caused was restricted since there were fewer of them. 3,170 fired at Belgium, England, and other nations. Of the V-2s targeted against Antwerp and London, little over 1/3 struck the cities. Furthermore, unlike the V-1, the V-2 was not able to tether defense planes and anti-aircraft guns while in flight, since it was typically incapable of being intercepted. One notable instance was when a V-2 accidentally went through a column of B-24 bombers that were on their way back to England following a mission. The rocket was destroyed by one of the machine gunners who opened fire on it. Historian Stephen Saloga stated that the expense of developing and producing the V-2 was stunning, estimated by a post-war U.S. study at about $2 billion, or about the same amount as was spent on the Allied atomic bomb program. However, compared to a single sizable RAF assault on Germany, the whole 7-month V-2 rocket campaign dropped fewer high explosives on all the targeted cities. Thanks for watching. Give a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos like this. See you in our next video.